Hey there, welcome back to my channel. Today, we're going back to this channel's roots. Crazy to think that I started this channel with a video series called Cat Tries to Bake, where I was literally learning how to bake a bunch of things on camera for the first time and failing a lot. Cut to years later, now that I'm on Blue Ribbon Baking Championship, I've gotten loads of questions about how to start baking and what kind of tools to get if you're first starting out. So today, I'm gonna run through some basic ingredients you should have in your kitchen and some tools that are helpful to have. Take it from someone who's bought tons of molds and random items that I ended up never using. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, and let's get started with ingredients. Some of these staple ingredients are things that you'll find in just about any baking recipe, from quick breads to cookies to brownies to muffins to cupcakes to cakes. Let's start with flour. You are absolutely going to need all-purpose flour when you start baking. There are different kinds: enriched, bleached, not bleached. I'm not that picky, I usually just grab the big bag from Costco. Now, eventually you might run into a need for a bread flour or cake flour, but usually just supermarket brand all-purpose flour will get you where you need to go. Sugar. I gotta refill this. Any brand of granulated sugar will do. Now, in terms of brown sugar, I personally always use dark brown sugar if a recipe calls for brown sugar because I just love that deeper molassesy flavor. But if you don't want that, you can just get light brown sugar. You will likely need sugar in any recipe you encounter, but brown sugar can be really great to enhance the flavor of chocolate chip cookies, brownies, cakes, and pies. When you get comfortable enough, if you think it might make sense with the recipe, you can actually try swapping out a little bit of the sugar that a recipe calls for and substitute it with brown sugar. Just play around and see how that changes the flavor. I've done that for a lot of my pie recipes and quick bread recipes, and it always turns out great. Salt. This is pretty self-explanatory, and you should have this already. This will bring balance to your sweets, but be careful. Make sure you know whether a recipe calls for table salt or for kosher salt. The ratio for table salt to kosher salt is 1 to 2. So let's just say you're baking something and you only have kosher salt, but the recipe calls for 1 teaspoon of table salt. Instead of putting in a 1-to-1 substitution where you just put in a teaspoon of kosher salt, you would put in 2. Vanilla extract. I think some people outside of the US find that the addition of vanilla extract is a very American thing and doesn't actually make a difference, but it's certainly very popular in all kinds of American recipes. It's super easy to make at home if you want to get some vanilla pods and buy some super cheap vodka. If you have some time to spare, you can just let it sit for a few weeks and then you'll have vanilla extract. Otherwise, it's not that expensive at the store. Baking powder and baking soda. This also needs a refill. These are your chemical leaveners and they'll help your baked goods rise. Most recipes will include one or the other and sometimes both. They are slightly different, so make sure you're adding the right item. Something I learned a few years ago is that baking soda spreads and baking powder puffs. So that's just something silly to keep in mind in case you're baking something and it doesn't look quite right. You might be using the wrong thing. Unsalted butter. It's not the end of the world if you get salted butter. Just take out some of the salt that the recipe calls for. But if you get unsalted, you can control how much salt goes into a recipe. And make sure you get a box of usually 4 of these sticks. They have the tablespoon measurements on it, so it's really easy to measure. And this is going to be way more accurate than getting a tub of butter and scooping tablespoons out. Eggs. A hot topic nowadays. Keep in mind that large eggs are standard in any baking recipe, but if you accidentally get extra large or regular eggs, don't fret. It doesn't matter all that much unless the recipe is asking for 3 or more eggs. And if you get the wrong eggs and you're not sure what to do, and the recipe calls for 3 or more eggs, just Google what the proper substitution would be and you'll be fine. Lastly, I'll just throw in powdered sugar or confectioner's sugar. You probably won't need this unless you're making frostings or icings, but if you're interested in decorating cookies or making a glaze for a lemon loaf or decorating a cake with buttercream, you're definitely going to want to have some of this. Okay, let's move on to tools. Let's talk about measuring tools first. I always measure all of my dry ingredients with either a kitchen scale or with measuring spoons depending on the quantity. I found that I always get the most consistent results on my bakes when I measure my dry ingredients by weight on a scale, but you can use dry measuring cups if you want to. I'm gonna put these down. Just be super aware of how to scoop certain ingredients. For example, to get an accurate 1 cup of flour, you have to kind of fluff up the flour a little bit, dip your cup in, and then sweep the excess off the top. But you don't have to do that for sugar. I just use the scale. For liquid ingredients, make sure you're using one of these liquid measuring cups and not the dry measuring cups. You can also use measuring spoons for smaller quantities as well. I have so many of these. I have anything from a tablespoon to like a 1/16 of a teaspoon, and I use them all. Now, in terms of working with your batters, you can definitely get by sort of with forks, spoons, chopsticks, whatever you already have on hand. But the following tools are really gonna make your life easier. Flat rubber spatulas. These are super helpful in terms of folding a batter or just scraping every last bit of batter out of a bowl. They're super easy to clean, and as you can see, you can get them in different sizes. Sure, you can use a spoon, I've done it, but this will make things a lot easier. Whisks. Whisks in different sizes have been super helpful for me. As you can see, these are all metal. I used to have silicone ones and they just didn't really do the job great. Again, yes, you can just use a fork to mix dry ingredients together, but for batters like a brownie mix, for example, you're definitely gonna wanna use a whisk. I like using a bigger one like this for brownie mix and then smaller ones to mix dry ingredients together, or to scramble like one little egg. Also, having a set of mixing bowls is nice too, preferably ones with a rubber bottom so that the bowl doesn't move around. A friend of mine got these for me a few years ago and I still use them all the time. Now for some slightly more advanced tools. A hand mixer is an amazing, extremely versatile tool. Another friend of mine got me this for my birthday maybe 4 years ago and I use this all the time. This is usually what I use to mix cake batter, but you can also use it for cookie dough, quick breads, or cupcake mixes. Technically, you can do all of those things with a regular whisk, but you'll have to use a lot more elbow grease. And for cookie dough especially, I would definitely recommend using the hand mixer instead of a regular whisk. For cookie dough, I would actually recommend the stand mixer, but if all you have is a hand mixer, it's perfectly fine. Speaking of stand mixers, if you really want to get more serious about baking, I would highly recommend getting a stand mixer. It doesn't have to be this big, you can get the smaller one. This is perfect for making cookie dough and for making buttercream. What's great is that you can leave it running and walk away to do dishes or get more ingredients ready. Honestly, it's on sale at Costco a lot, so if you have a membership, I would keep an eye out for those deals. Time to put this back! Lastly, if you want to get into cake decorating, I recommend offset spatulas, piping bags, and piping tips. I've got small ones here and bigger ones here. You might also want to get these couplers. They help you to switch out the piping tips without changing the piping bag. I used to use these really cool reusable piping bags, but I wanted to be extra mindful of people with nut allergies and making sure there's no cross-contamination, so I use these plastic ones, unfortunately. And if you want to get into cake decorating, I would recommend some gel food coloring. I have a bunch of different kinds here. Okay, we went through a lot today, but I hope I've been able to set you up for success if you're really thinking about starting to bake this year. I failed so many times when I first started out, and a lot of that is actually documented on this channel. So just keep trying, keep experimenting, don't give up. You can drop any questions about baking or about anything else, I guess, in the comments, and let me know if this was helpful. Thank you so much for watching. Please subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you next time.